Hey guys, welcome back to Gotta Be Geek. It's been a couple weeks, and if you've watched any of my previous videos, you may know that I usually like to do videos once every weekend or so, but sometimes life gets in the way, and in this particular case, I have some good news to share as to why, so if you're interested, stick around to the end to find out. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Mike. I'm your local super geek here on Gotta Be Geek, and in these videos, I go through tutorials, talk about dev tools, and sometimes host tech talks, all to help you be a better engineer or developer. Also, if you're new here, go down there and hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you get notified when I drop future videos. And since you're down there, you might as well just go ahead and hit that like button. Whether you're new or not, just click it, smash it, punch it, whatever makes you happy. Show the support for me and the channel. It really helps me out. On the topic of tech talks, I know I haven't done any tech talks since the first one on this channel. Promise you that those are still in the plan and something I want to do more of. Originally, I wanted to do more in-person ones, and I had done a virtual one for the first one, and the in-person ones have been obviously a bit hard to schedule because of the quarantine and social distancing, making that a bit prohibitive. So I will try and get some virtual ones planned on the docket coming up here soon. On to the topic of today's video, and that's going to be Python and Visual Studio Code. We're going to follow a tutorial by Microsoft to set up Python and Visual Studio Code, and the reason we're doing this video is because in a previous video, which I'll have a link for here up there for you to click on, it was a C in Visual Studio Code video that I had done several weeks ago. And in that video, we had a commenter, which I'll have the picture over here for you to look at because I may slaughter the name. But the commenter's name was Nishant Rajan, who had asked if we could do a video of Python for Visual Studio Code. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I didn't really want to just follow along with the tutorial unless I felt I could add any value to it. So I did spend some time following through the tutorial and going through different things that I thought I might do, like making a repository with a Python project. So I did find a few gotchas and things that weren't covered in that tutorial that I think are useful for you to know. So we're going to cover that in today's video. So make sure you stick around to find all that stuff out. We'll roll that intro and we'll get right into it. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go through the Microsoft tutorial. There's a couple little small adjustments I'll be making through this, and I'll be skimming over a lot of it pretty quick. So if I go over something too fast, feel free to pause and go back. If you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments section and I'll respond to those and try and clarify anything that I missed. I'm going to probably skip over a few things in this to make it pretty quick. So we'll go ahead and pull up the tutorial here. So prerequisites, obviously VS Code. If you don't already have it installed, install that. And then VS Code is Python installation. There's a link here for the extension, and then you can search for it in the Python extensions for VS Code. And then obviously Python 3. So if you don't have Python 3 installed, you can click on that and link right here where it says Python from python.org. And then for me, I would prefer, since I have a 64-bit version of Windows, and most people probably do these days, I usually like to install 64-bit versions of programs if there's one available. And by default, this button right here, whatever version happens to be there when you go to install it, for me obviously it's 3.8.5, this is going to install or download the 32-bit installer, and I want the 64-bit version. If it doesn't matter to you, feel free to just click on this button and download it. Otherwise, go to Windows here, and then you're going to see a bunch of install options. We want to focus on stable releases, and then down here you want Windows x86-64 executable installer. So we'll click on that, and then once that's done, we're going to go ahead and click on this. And prior to this, I've actually, as I kind of mentioned a little bit, I've gone through this already, and I'm to try and find all the talking points and mistakes that people might run into, or that I've run into that I thought other people might have problems with, to try and capture my different talking points for this video. And so I've actually gone through this installation a couple times to try and capture everything that might be a problem or might not be, I guess. So I've uninstalled everything. I've removed every environment variable that this comes with, just so that while I'm going through it here on the tutorial, you can see what it's going to look like for you, so that we both experience the same thing as you're kind of following along. So this is a completely fresh installation. The only thing I do have installed, because I think it came with Visual Studio 2019 a while ago, is I have the 2.7 version of Python installed, which shouldn't have any impact on any of this. So we'll go ahead and go through with the installation here. So we're going to checkbox the Add Python 3.8 to Path, and then we're going to ignore the Install Now option. We want to go to the Customize installation. If not all of these are checked, please check them all, and then go to Next. And then we want to install for all users. You're going to see the file path change here. And then we're also going to select these two download options. And then we're going to remove the program files. So a couple of things we'll go over here. One is, why did I choose install for all users? Well, the reason is because the setting that it adds to your environment variables ends up being kind of wonky, I guess you could say, and later parts of the tutorial end up being weird because of where your installation happens. Additionally, the reason I removed the program files piece is because, kind of like the C and C++ for Visual Studio video that we did where we installed the compiler directly to the C drive, is because for whatever reason still today there are some development environments and things that you can do that seem to really not like having spaces in the file path. So for me, if it's something to do with development, I just don't like to have it in a path that involves spaces. So just to avoid any potential issues, if you have issues and you didn't install it to just the C drive, I would recommend doing this. It may alleviate whatever the problem is. And so I would say remove the program files and just install it directly to your C drive. So I'm going to go ahead and click install here. You're going to get a UAC prompt. You want to click yes on that, and then we'll let this install, and then I'll come back and fast forward. I'll come back when this is done installing. All right, so we've got our setup successful message here, so we can go ahead and hit close here. We can exit this page, and then we can continue through with the rest of the tutorial. And the next part is going to be the verifying of the Python installation. And so we'll go ahead and open up a terminal like it says. We'll go ahead and do Python or pi-3- version for Windows. So we can see here that we get the 3.85 that we expected. And then we're going to go ahead and start VS Code. And so I usually don't ever open up VS Code this way, but you certainly can. I already have a folder that I want to use. So we'll go here, Python VS Code. And you can see I already have a Python file here that I've added here. This is actually going to be from a later part of the tutorial. So just go ahead and you can make a file and then put this stuff in it or not. You can get to it when we get there. And then it says select the interpreter. We're going to do the 3.8.5. And then it's going to ask if you want, and you probably can't see it because of the my little box down the bottom right hand corner there is blocking part of it, but this is recommending or noticing, or the extension is noticing that we don't have pylint installed, and we don't need that. So I'm just going to hit X, and we can go back to the tutorial. And so we're there. We've selected the interpreter, and then this talks about making a hello world part. That's a little just too rudimentary for me. I don't think it's really going to give you much, but if you want to follow through this tutorial and make the hello world part, it's just going to have you type in these couple lines and then hit F5 so that you can see it run. We're going to go ahead and skip through that to install and use packages. So you can see this is the block of code that I've already copied into a file. I just did it in hello.py. I think they made a file called standardplot.py. Make it whatever file name you want, doesn't really matter. And then we'll go ahead and we'll make a debug folder here. And this is optional. You can certainly it's gonna fail because so much like the hello world part, if you just hit F5 and you don't have a configuration, it's gonna bring up your configuration list to figure out how you wanna run it. Personally, I don't like that because then I have to select Python file every single time. So I like to just come in here and create the launch.json file, select the option, and now it will just do this every single time until we change it to something different. And then now we'll go ahead and do the installation part. So if we go down, we should see the creation of an environment. So we're going to copy that command, and then we'll hit that. And then we're going to say yes to this. So you can't see the whole thing again on the bottom right, but it says we notice a new virtual environment has been created. Do you want to select it for the workspace folder? You want to select yes for that. And then it's going to pop up this linter pylint not installed again. We can just hit X. We're going to ignore that for the moment. And then the next part of the command was to activate the environment. And so we'll go back, and then we'll go to the folder here. You should see that the .venv folder was created, and this lib folder is where everything will get installed in a moment. So we'll activate our environment, and you should see your command line change here and have this, for me, green little .venv. It might be different for you if you're not using PowerShell for your terminal here, but now we have our virtual environment set up. So the next part is if we go down to installing the packages. So we want this Windows one. Obviously, some of this is all going to be a little bit different for you if you have, if you're on Linux or Mac. And so we'll go ahead and do python-m pip install. And it's installing all the dependencies. Oh, and you can see that when we activated the environment, it automatically selected the Python interpreter from our .venv environment. If for whatever reason this ever doesn't seem to select the right one for you, or this doesn't appear to be the right interpreter, this, looking through and going through this a few times, running into some problems and looking up different issues and stuff like that, this has been, I've kind of noticed a common thing that people miss sometimes, is that it's using the correct interpreter. So you can see that I can go back and choose the normal interpreter, but this interpreter doesn't have any packages installed to it right now, right? So everything I'm doing is all done in this local copy of the interpreter in my virtual environment. And you can see this .venv scripts Python versus the one that's here. So because I'm installing everything in my virtual environment, if I change the interpreter back to this one, then things are not going to work correctly. So if you're working with a virtual environment, you definitely want to make sure that the interpreter that it's using is the one that's in your virtual environment. If you don't ever see that the case, like for some reason, let's say we went in here and we selected that, I'm going to ignore again that Pylint. Now we still have the virtual environment activated from the command line, so when we do installation commands and other things like that, they're still going to install to our virtual environment. But then once we run Python, the extension is going to use this version, and then things will likely break or have problems. So you just want to make sure that those match up, that you're using your virtual environment here and that the Python interpreter the extension is using, because that's what this is referencing, is which interpreter the extension is using. You just want to make sure that they match up. So now we have the matplotlib installed, and as you can see here, if we go through the tutorial, it says that we should be able to just run the app and then get our plot up on the screen. So there we go. So now we have the plot up, pretty simple and quick. And so now you've gotten a simple application in Python. You've got packages and installation and virtual environments. And the virtual environments, as I kind of mentioned, or no, I didn't mention, but the virtual environments are just your way to separate packages from global ones. So if you're familiar with npm and Node.js, and you have the package.json file, which we'll get to something similar to that here in a minute, but the pip installer or the virtual environment using pip installs these packages to your local folder so that it's segregated away from the other folders that you may have or other projects that you have. So if you're only doing projects on your local machine, then this works out great if you don't ever plan on collaborating with anybody. But the challenge becomes is much like when I was going to create a repository, much like I do for a lot of my videos as an example for people to look at. I quickly realized, well, that's going to be problematic, because if you look here at this, the git change count here, it says 2K plus, and that's a lot of changes. And so we don't want to be committing 2,000 files for a project that's so simple to our Git repository. So the next part was like, well, dang, like how do we make sure that this is usable for people, that they can, clone this repository without having to clone 2,000 files? So the way that's done is using a package called pipenv. And you might ask me, well, why don't we just add a git ignore, right? So we could do that. We could do git ignore, and then we could add in the .venv and ignore our virtual environment folder. Now the problem is, while we do get this updated to 3 files, because now it's only seeing the launch.json, git ignore, and the hello py, this makes it kind of cumbersome, because in a simple one Python file that might be fine, you could go here to the Python file and you could look at the packages that are being used, and you could install them. You could make a virtual environment yourself, install the packages yourself, and then probably be good to go. But from a collaborative perspective, that kind of gets a little cumbersome, and you have you would have to constantly see what packages have been changed. If someone did have a Git repository that was working like this, you'd have to constantly go through, and as this got bigger, if you had different Python files with different packages that they were dependent on, you run into more and more problems, because you now have to climb through the different files to look at what you need to install, and that's just really a pain. So that's why we're going to move on to the alternate way I would suggest managing packages for a Python project, because one, I think it works good both for local, and it works good if you're planning on making a repository and collaborating with others, or even if you're not collaborating with others and you just want a way to do Git control over a particular project so that you have a way to easily track changes and things like that that you get out of Git. So we're going to go ahead and remove this virtual environment because we don't need this virtual environment anymore. And then we're going to deactivate our current virtual environment, and we're going to go back to our normal interpreter. And then this is going to again bug us about Pylint, and we're going to clear this out, and I'm going to install the pip env package. So I'll do python-m pip install pip env. We want to do user pip env. So we'll let that install. And then you're going to see here that because we installed it to the user, so you could install it to just the not the user. You could leave out that user flag. But because we did the user flag, it's going to warn us here that we should add this Python 38 scripts roaming path to our path, which we can certainly do. So the way we would do that is go to our environment variables. If I could type. Oh, yep. Sorry. So edit system environment variables, edit, what a path, edit, and then we're just going to do a new one, and then we'll do that. Click OK and OK, and then we should be good to go from there. You may, well, we'll actually just go ahead and do it just in case, because sometimes loading, or sometimes you need to reload the shell for different things to get access to it. So we're just going to go ahead and do that just in case so that we can make sure the path environment variables are all set up to go. So now we should be able to do pip env and install matplotlib. And then, okay, so now, much like npm, you have a packages or package JSON file, and then packages lock or package lock.json. And so here you have a pip file and a pip file lock. And so this probably will look pretty similar to the way a package JSON would. And then here is our list of packages. You have packages and dev packages, which version of Python it's required. And then there's no more virtual environment here because the virtual environment is saved on your machine in a different place. So I'm gonna get that directory and we will save it for you to find later. So I'll put this here. I'm just gonna put it in a comment. So, and then it would be like your folder name, and then yeah, and that'll be your path. So, and then obviously your own name for whatever your username is. And so every time you make a environment in this way, it should do that, and it'll be like folder name and then some kind of hash. So in this case, I will give mine. So this is the full path for what mine looks like. So you can see it's gotten this like hash here, and then the folder name that we're working in, which is Python_VS Code. And so now it manages this here. So as an FYI, if you ever delete this project or in the repository, you'll need to clear out, or you may need to every once in a while, these virtual environments because they're no longer stored in the project here. But this way you have a central place for someone to come through and be able to install all the different dependencies for a particular project. And so you can come through here, we can save this, and it's going to complain about Pylint not being installed, which we can ignore again. Oh, and we also want to save the interpreter. So you can see that it's got just like we did earlier, where we made sure that the interpreter matched our virtual environment. So in this case, we have the folder with the Python that we're working on. So we want to make sure our interpreter is matching that one. And we can actually go ahead and finally say yes to this one, because now you can see it's going to do the pip env install with the --dev, and it's installing a dev package so that we don't have a dev dependency. and then now you've got a simple way to manage packages for a repository rather than having to commit everything. So now we've still only got 5 files, but we have a nice way for people to see which packages they need to install. And the last couple things that I want to go over are going to be installing or being able to use a virtual directory in your local folder or project folder like you would normally. So if you followed this so far, you've noticed, and we can see it here, I've gone through and like created this virtual directory again, just because I was going through and messing with some stuff, but you can see it's made this path here that we've already talked about for my virtual directory. And if you don't want to have to constantly go to this virtual environments folder and clean them up whenever you delete those projects, you know, so if you're working with other people, you're working with a lot of Python projects, and you download the repo, you would do, as an example, you could just do Python pip v install, and that will read, if you've got the pip file and the pip file.lock, it will read that and it will automatically install it. And the default location is this virtual environments folder inside your user folder. If you want to be able to keep everything all together in one location, there's a way around that. How we're going to do that is going to be a little bit different depending on whether you're using PowerShell or whether you're using command prompt Linux. This will obviously a little bit different for you. And Linux, I think it's like export, and you can set an environment variable, or Mac, I guess. But for us, it's going to be different. Now for me, I usually prefer to use PowerShell. I've been using it. I use it in pretty much all of my videos, but it's going to be a little bit different if you're using PowerShell versus command prompt. So if we come in here and we do, let's see, I don't think it'll let me choose that for some reason. Let's do, there we go. So in command prompt, we have the set command, which we can use to set various environment variables. And there's one that we need, which I will grab here, because I can't remember the darn name. So it's going to be, so you can do, in a command prompt, you can do set, and then this environment variable equals 1. And because command prompt works a little bit differently, where if you set environment variables like this, it saves it in just the context of this session. And so when we run it, it doesn't save it personally. So you can do set here, you can, and then you can exit out, and then you can go check your environment variables in Windows, and this environment variable will not be there. And so it doesn't seem to save it beyond that. So that's where I find this a little bit, or at least it didn't for me. So maybe it will for you. I'm not quite sure why that wouldn't have done it for me. But I did this as I was going through, and I've on and off been editing and adjusting this process as I've been going through. And it didn't save it for my user's environment variable, and I didn't see it in my computer one either. So for PowerShell, this will be a little bit different. So we're going to delete this here. And just to make sure that it always works for you and isn't just a temporary session, we're going to go to environment variables again. And we're going to go environment variables here, and we're going to do new, and then we're going to copy and paste in that name here, and we're going to set it to 1. And so then what that's going to do is when we go to do pip env install, so we'll do clear, and we're going to do pip env install, and then that is going to see the environment, or maybe not, just kidding. Because much like usual environment variables, it doesn't catch it until we reload the application. And again, I think I mentioned this in the C++ one, but you can't just exit the shell and then reopen it because it doesn't seem to kind of catch everything the same. So we can do git child item, and then our cool. So we have our environment variable here. And so now we can do the pip env install, and it should see that now. Instead of installing it in that directory, you can see it's created a .venv folder for us here directly in our project. So it's kind of nice because now we don't have to go fishing around and tracking different folders in other locations. So anytime you're installing repos, and so you can see this is exactly how you do it. Just like you would if you're familiar with npm and Node.js, once you cloned a repo, you would just do npm install, and that would install your packages. Similar way here, we just did pip env install, it read the pip file, and because the environment variable, it just stored everything inside this .vmv folder. And we can again we'll do Control-Shift-P, and we'll select our interpreter, and then it's not, so we'll reload this again one more time. We could have just gone through and then navigated to the folder path, but I just wanted you to be able to see that it should pop up here. There we go. So now there's this virtual EMVs one, or we can do this one. They're ultimately, I guess, kind of the same thing, but this is the old one that we did, and we don't really want that one. We want the one that's in this folder here. And then we can do just like we did before. What's it? Scripts, yep. Activate. Oh, that's why, because I missed a period there. Scripts, activate. There we go. So now we've again got the right interpreter selected here for the extension. We've got our environment activated here in PowerShell. But again, so it's pretty much the same as before. We still have a .vmv folder, and we're ignoring it so that we don't accidentally commit that to Git control. And now we've got a pip file so that when other people clone a repository, it will all work the way we want it to. So we can easily go through, we can even just do that again so we can see the process, and we'll delete this. And then, yep, okay. And we're going to deactivate here, and we're going to reselect our original one. So this is how you would be if you cloned the repository. You wouldn't have that environment folder. You would have your base interpreter selected, and then you would just do pip env install, or you would need to set the environment variable like we did earlier. And now it's going to pop up here if we want to set that as our environment. It's the extension's found it. That's what it usually should do. I don't know why it didn't do that the first time, or maybe it did and I just didn't notice the little pop-up. But it's selected the copy of the interpreter inside of our environment folder here. And then we can again do the vmv scripts activate. And then we're all set to go to develop on a collaborative Python project now. And it's got everything installed that we need, and we can go ahead and go to our Python file here, and we're gonna say no again to that, and then we can run it, and boom, we've got our plot here, and everything's working exactly the way we would want it. Hopefully you found that really useful for you and the extra bits that weren't included in the Microsoft tutorial. I know for me, it's been a little while since I had done Python stuff. I think it's maybe been like a decade or so. So it was nice to get a bit of a refresher for me to go through some of the steps myself beforehand and kind of figure out those things that I thought might be helpful for anybody else, particularly anybody that's new to getting into Python and using Visual Studio Code as their primary editor maybe. And so I'll probably use some more Python in any future projects so I can kind of keep up with it. One of the things that I noticed was that in setting this up is that Python now has these virtual environments and things that we went over in the video that I didn't really have in the Python of my time when I first did a Python project about a decade or so ago. And so the package management aspect has been a bit nicer and improved upon since that time, and that's really neat. Also, I told you at the beginning of the video that if you wanted to find out why I was a little delayed in getting this next video out, that's because I was on vacation down in San Diego. The last video that I had done a couple weekends ago was the part 2 for React State Management. I'll have a link for that series that you can check out. They're up at the top for you to click on. I had done a React State Management series where I went over Redux and the context API, and I had filmed it all together and then just edited it in such a way that I could kind of upload and release the second part while I was on a vacation. Then when we got home, I had my parents over at the house, and we were doing some kind of remodeling, I guess, of our entertainment area in the living room, which I'll show some side-by-sides in the before and after here for you to check out if you're interested. And the reason we were down in San Diego, though, and spending some time with my wife's family, is because we were doing a gender reveal down there for our baby, and we found out that we are having a boy. So we are definitely excited for that, and so that is the reason why I didn't have any videos coming out for a couple weeks. So obviously we're getting back into it, and I will always try and stick to one per weekend if I can. The last bit of news I have for you guys is I've finally launched my new website, and this one is using Azure Static Web Apps instead of just regular Azure Web Apps, which is nice because it's free, so it's saving me some money every month. And I will do a future video talking about Azure Static Web Apps, some of the pros and cons that I've experienced so far that I don't like or do like, and so that you can maybe make an educated decision on whether or not you want to move from whatever you're using to Azure Static Web Apps, whether it's from Azure VMs or anything to do with Amazon, like Amazon S3, or maybe just regular Azure Web Apps, and seeing if it's the right solution for you and your website. I've redesigned the website a little bit, and also you might notice that I have a merchandise link or page for you to check out. There's nothing there yet. It just says coming soon. Obviously that wasn't intended at first. I plan on releasing that when I launch the new website, but I really wanted to get the new website out. One, because I wanted to save the money, and two, I just didn't like having the old one. And so the merchandise store will hopefully be coming, I think, in a few months. So it's kind of coming a little bit behind, but I wanted to do some merchandise with the Gotta Be Geek logo and other stuff. If any of you are interested in that, I know I will definitely be sporting that as soon as I can get those. So look out for that in the future. I'll probably make a notice in a future video for anybody that's interested to let you know when the merchandise store is actually live. But for now, there's just a placeholder page there. But let me know what you think of the website. Let me know what you think of the redesign. That is going to be it for me. But as always, it's not it for you. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you go down and do that and hit that bell icon so you can get notified when I drop a new video. And I've already talked about probably 3 or 4 videos I'm going to do in this video alone. So definitely a reason, I think, to subscribe if you haven't already. And while you're down there, please hit that like button so that you can show support for me and the channel. It definitely helps me out. And I will see you guys in the next one.